So I want to talk about your training now based on how it transitioned from that 5-year period. Whatever happened with your life and all that, you started exiting that period and you thought, well, I'm getting excited to want to maybe compete again. How old were you? And then what did that start to look like on the training side?
So if we're looking at, so that would have been 2019. So it would have been nearly 5 years. I suppose it would have been 34, if I'm thinking right. 34, what, 34? Yeah, around 34. So say mid 30s. And I started to do a 3-day split, which was push pull legs. So I kept it very basic. It was still all the max OT exercises and reps and stuff like that, but it was on a slightly different split. So it was still everything once a week, but I would just literally kept it simple. I thought, right, okay, I'll do a push pull legs. So it's just shoulders, triceps and chest on one day, back, biceps and traps the next day, and then just legs on the third day. And that was pretty much set from that point onwards. Probably last couple of years where I've kind of changed up a little bit. When I came back, it was just very simple, very basic, push pull legs, and I just sort of stayed with that. Sessions were slightly longer because of that. So maybe some sessions were like 2 hours, maybe legs an hour and a half, back, biceps and traps maybe 2 hours, and chest, triceps, shoulders again probably 2 hours. I generally take quite long rest periods between sets just to make sure I'm fully recovered, make sure I'm getting the most out of the next set. It's always taken me quite long to recover between sets, so something that's probably prolonging the sessions slightly.
So what I'm curious about is that you talk about the max OT principles, and the original sample from max OT, or the frequency that they tend to advocate, is that 5-day per week routine, right?
Yeah.
Where one body part's getting hit per time, with the exception of arms.
Yeah.
Did you ever experiment with that at one point as well?
Yeah, so when I first started into that sort of training split on the first part of my bodybuilding career, that was what I was doing pretty much. It was a 5-day, but just as it is in the book, chest on one day with maybe something like abs or calves tagged onto it, back on one day, a big muscle group and maybe a small muscle group with it over sort of like a 4 or 5 days. That was what I was doing, yeah.
What made you stick more to a lower frequency for the most part? I mean, you mentioned kids, you got a family. So was that what enticed you to stick to a lower frequency?
Pretty much, yeah. It swings and roundabouts because you've obviously got on the one hand the sessions are slightly longer, whereas if I took it over more days, then the sessions were slightly shorter. So I suppose it's sort of give and take. So it depends on sort of how my life is at the time, I suppose, and sort of what sort of habits and routines I'm in and what will work best at that particular time. It was obviously the 3-day one with the slightly longer sessions, and having the 4 days off completely, just rest, maybe a bit of cardio if I'm playing football or something like that.
So how is it looking now? Like, is it similar to what it was 4 years ago, where you do the 3 days, the chest, shoulders, triceps, back and biceps, and then legs, 3-day split over a week period? Are you still doing something like that now?
Now it kind of chops and changes a lot from week to week. I'll probably start training on Sunday and I'll do chest and abs, and then I won't train on Monday due to work scheduling. And so on Tuesday I'll do legs, and then Wednesday I'll do back and traps, and then Thursday shoulders and triceps, and then Friday I'll just do sort of biceps and forearms or something like that. Maybe I'll do the triceps on the Friday with the biceps and shoulders on their own. So they are quite short sessions now. So it's probably over a 5 or even 6 days that now, actually, come to think of it. Yeah. So it's like shorter sessions over 6 days. But then depending on what I've got on the next week, I could just switch it back to a 3-day and then just do it for that week, or maybe 2 weeks. It's kind of just very much sporadic.
You can speak to this given the fact that one week it might be across 6 days, the next week it might be a 4, week after it might be 3. Do you find that that influences the progress as far as, because max OT principles, we know this, for those who are listening who may not know this, it's really about progressing loads, right? Like that's the thing, within the 4 to 6 rep range.
So when I came back in 2019, I sort of stayed with the max OT principles for a duration of time, but pretty much I was kind of at a point of where my strength wasn't really going anywhere. I do still train low volume, but now it's more like, because I know my strength's not really progressing, there's not really that need to just stay within that 4 to 6 rep range. So a lot of the times now I'll kind of keep the volume as it is with the sets and stuff like that and the exercises, but I will just move about the rep ranges. So sometimes it'll be 4 to 6, but I can sometimes now go up to 10, 12, 15s, just because my strength isn't really increasing on anything anymore. I've kind of hit that point now. So it's more just on form and execution. So the rep range isn't really that important to me anymore, really. It's just more about that execution. Still training to concentric failure, but I'm not really structured in that strict, rigid rep range of 4 to 6 anymore. I'm not too bothered. It won't go below 4. It probably won't go above 15. It'll sort of sit anywhere in between.
And as far as progression is concerned, because I'm sure that's what you're after when you're training to a degree, right? what are you looking at now? If it's not necessarily the loads within that 4 to 6 rep range, is it just within whatever rep range you're working with? You're still trying to increase loads over time, maybe with the execution and proper execution and that type of thing?
I suppose it's fine tuning to a degree. So I'm just trying to look at my physique from, is there any sort of points I can maybe try and bring up if there's any way I can? Obviously, at this point in time, I'm under no illusion that progress is going to be very slow, if any at all. At this point in time, my mindset is more progress is not regressing, if you know what I mean. So if I can maintain what I've got, that to me is progress at this point, or it will be over the coming years. Because if you're in any sport, you can't expect to be progressing all the time. You're going to hit a point in your career where you're going to be at your peak, and then it's going to be a slow downward trend from there. You can't be expecting to keep getting better and better and better like in any other sport. So I wouldn't really apply it to bodybuilding as much either, because again, there's going to be that time when regression is going to happen. It's just trying to limit that. So if you can limit regression, that is the aim, I suppose, now.
Do you feel like you hit your peak now at 38?
I think so, yeah. I think the last couple of years I've competed, I've been at my best. I don't think I've improved since 2019 to 2022. I think I look similar each time I've competed. So I did 2019, 2020 and 2022. I don't feel like my physique looked dramatically different on either of those shows. Tan was different. The posing was better on some instances. But when you've got a keen eye for looking at the intricate details of the physique, nothing was really different, I wouldn't have said.
Did your training change at all from that 3-year period of when you competed?
Not overly, no. Maybe in 2022, it was more across the spreading everything over sort of 5 or 6 days. It wasn't a 3-day split then, but I think 2019, 2020, it stayed with the 3 days.
But as far as like, you weren't doing anything like drastically different, because I'm wondering, like, let's say you were really striving to try to make that difference. You've refused to believe that you hit your peak. Do you think personally that there's something that you could be doing that maybe you're not doing right now that could have a different package on stage if you did something different with your training or nutrition?
So you mean if I increase maybe the volume or the frequency of the workouts and stuff like that?
Maybe, or maybe the way you approached it via exercise selection. Maybe you're implementing machines. Maybe you're doing something entirely different and you're thinking, let me try this experiment here and see, can I bring a totally different physique, and has it improved? It's clear that it improved because I did something that I just never did before.
That is something that potentially I could have improved on. Maybe it's something I could experiment with in the future. I have in the past, like on odd occasion, tried higher volumes, high frequencies on some muscle groups just as an experiment. So for example, I've tried training like calves 3 times a week just to see how I got on with that for a couple of months. I've done it with other muscle groups. Never really seen any sort of noticeable changes in that period of time. So I suppose I've got that to see maybe it won't work, but I guess until I tried it, I wouldn't really know. Maybe it's something I could try in the future, but it's hard to say, I suppose, without actually physically doing it and trying it. And again, is there other variables going to be affecting that? It's difficult to pin down whether or not that particular thing is going to work, absent of all the other variables in play as well.
That's a great point, because obviously it needs to be practical, right? Or else it won't be successful and you won't be able to complete whatever plan you set out, right? Like we talked about like machines and all this stuff. It's like, well, if you're having to go to a public gym now, that might create more life stress, and then that could influence things in a negative way, right?
Yeah, exactly. For whatever reason, I might not be able to get a session in there. But again, I could still train at home for that particular session. But you're right, it's more about what's practical and what's sustainable in terms of, at the end of the day, natural bodybuilding is a hobby. It is a full-time job in a sense. We're not getting paid for it. It's not a career as anything like that. It's just a hobby. So whatever you do within the sport is going to have to be sustainable and practical. Otherwise, whatever might be optimal might not be sustainable or practical. And if that's the case, then it's pointless.
Yeah, great points. That's excellent. With the reps, I know that you mentioned that you started experimenting now with even going up as high as 15 for certain things. Is that mostly single joint exercises like arms, like biceps, triceps, that type of thing? Or are you doing that with some of the compounds as well?
So my leg routine's never changed. So I've always done from the start 3 or 4 sets of squats off the quads. And my routine's never changed from that. From the beginning, it's always stayed the same. So, but recently I've, last couple of months, I started doing like the last set would be sort of just putting 3 plates on the bar and trying to get as many reps as possible. So I'm up to about 20 at the moment with 3 plates, which is, it's good. It's not as good as some other people, but relative to my own sort of progress and my own sort of strength, it's been really, really an improvement. That has actually helped with the lower reps as well. So the next week when I'm coming in doing the normal lower reps, I find that I'm better at that with doing that higher rep set at the end.
Why do you you think that is?
It feels like it's because it's just getting that extra bit of endurance seems to be helping with those last couple of reps on the lower end. It's probably something to do with that. I couldn't confirm that it's definitely the case, but there's obviously something in that high rep set that's definitely helping with the lower reps.
Right. Yeah, it sounds reasonable, and vice versa. I'm sure there's benefits from doing low reps to being able to maybe handle heavier loads in the high reps potentially, right?
Yeah, if I was to come in and do a set of squats as my first set with the 140 to try and get as many reps as possible, I don't think I'd get anywhere near that 18 to 20 reps I'm getting, because I'm doing those heavier weights first. The set at the end, it feels really smooth, it feels really light, it just feels different than if you were to do that at the start. So there's definitely, it worked both ways, I suppose.
But that makes sense. The order of it makes more sense to me, I would think as well. Assuming that it's high effort, like if you're doing it to prep a joint or something and it's not high effort, like for example, if you're doing a set of 20 for like some push downs before you get to maybe your set of 8, well, then I could understand that, because jumping right into a set of 8 or a set of 6 on push downs might not feel so good on the elbows, right? So it's exercise specific too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it is. And I've learned that through the years as well. So the one thing with max OT and the 4 to 6 rep range, I always found that with my back, I couldn't really connect my back with it. So I found now later down the line, I do need slightly more reps on back just to get the contraction, because I always felt that 4 to 6 is not enough on back exercises personally. So that's whereas I felt better with the higher reps on back, only slightly higher, maybe sort of towards 8 to 12 or whatever. I think the one thing I've learned is it can be different between muscle groups. What might feel right on one muscle group, reps and sets might not feel the same on another one.
You mentioned Jeff Willet earlier, of course, Max OT, we were talking about that. How did you come across that specifically?
Yes, so that's something I stuck just through looking online, looking through around your forums and articles and stuff like that. I think I just stumbled across it there. When I was first training, it wasn't really low volume, but it wasn't high volume either. It was kind of the standard sort of 3 sets in the sort of 8 to 12 rep range. I was finding that